Today, I'm here to talk to you about the world's most important archaeological site that you've probably never heard of. And I'm talking about the Windover site in Brevard County, Florida. It's about 5 miles away from Cape Canaveral. I came upon this site when I was researching archaeological sites for our mobile app Pathways. I create the content for that, and I wanted to create a tour that showcased real life archaeological sites that mimic some of the exhibitions we have at the museum. Our chief curator, Matt Woodside, casually mentioned Windover to me, and after 2 minutes of Googling, I was absolutely fascinated by this site and was surprised that I hadn't heard of it before. So I'm here to share what I've learned with you. So Windover is an ancient burial site used by people that lived in Florida about 7,000 years ago. It is potentially the most significant ancient burial site in North America. We've certainly gleaned a lot of information about people that lived during the Archaic period. So the discovery of Windover happened in the 1980s. In 1982, a backhoe operator was digging out a mucky pond to begin development on the Windover Farms housing development in Titusville. When he dug out a big scoop, he noticed a round brown object in the muck, and it turned out to be a human skull. To the developer's credit, they completely halted construction, and they called in the authorities. The bodies were so well preserved, initially people thought that they might be the work of a modern day serial killer. When they got the radiocarbon dates back and it showed that these people lived 7,000 to 8,000 years ago, it changed everything. They called in some archaeologists from Florida State University, and over the course of 3 years, 3 seasons, they excavated the site. What they found were 168 bodies, which is so significant, it's unbelievable. And these bodies were so well preserved that brain matter was actually found in 91 of the skulls. And the reason these bodies were so well preserved is because of the layers of peat that were at the bottom of the pond. Now, you may have heard of bog bodies in Europe, people that were essentially mummified by being buried in these peat bogs. And that's essentially what was happening here, except they weren't mummified. There was no skin or muscle, it was just bone. The peat here in Florida also had a very neutral pH. So peat preserves things really well because it's anoxic, meaning it has no oxygen. And when it comes to fossilization or preservation, we don't want any oxygen. Oxygen promotes decay and decomposition. And so when there's an environment without oxygen, that's when you get really good preservation. So because the archaeologists were able to excavate so many bodies, they were able to get a really good picture of who these people were 7,000 years ago. They were able to determine that the average height for a man was about 5.5 feet, and the average height for a woman was about 5 feet. The oldest age that they could estimate was about 60 years old, and many of the adults had arthritis in their hands, in their shoulders, very similar to adults living today. And they also were able to determine that life for these people was difficult. About 50% of the bodies were children. And there was one child about 15 to 16 years old whose remains showed that he had a severe case of spina bifida, something that would have paralyzed him from the waist down. But to live to 15 to 16 years old, he would have needed constant care and support. And so it also showed that these people were, wildly compassionate and really cared for the children within their community. The burials were unique within themselves in that they showed a lot of ritual or ceremony around them. So almost all of the bodies were buried in a flexed or a fetal position. They were placed on their left side with their head pointing west and their face pointing north. They were also buried with lots of objects. So burying people with objects is something, we've done for a very long time. We still do it today. But they also showed that children were actually buried with more objects than adults. So again, this shows the high value that this group of people placed on children, similar to our society today. Some of the objects that were placed with people included things like bones from animals, shells, shark teeth. Some more interesting things were bones that had been incised or carved. So there were a few pretty large bird bones, probably from a pelican, that had been carved. And of the 7 that they found, the majority were buried with women. We're not quite sure what the significance is for that. But also there was a bottle gourd that was found. They grow wildly here, but they're not very successful. To make them successful, they really need human intervention. So the fact that they found a whole bottle gourd with a burial and then fragments of bottle gourds throughout the site indicates that these people weren't necessarily agriculturalists, but they were horticulturalists. So they were taking care of what was already there, and that's very significant. The other thing they were able to use is pollen and seeds found around the burials. And this is a field called Paleo Botany, where scientists are able to essentially paint a picture of the environment by looking at seeds and pollen of vegetation. And what this showed us is that these people were using this site seasonally. They didn't live here year-round. Most of the pollen and seeds associated with the burials showed that these people were inhabiting this area in late summer to early fall. Now, where they were the rest of the year, we're not quite sure, but they did move from place to place. Arguably, the most exciting discovery for archaeologists came in the 3rd and final season. One of the archaeologists noticed there was something on the bones that wasn't peat, but it was some other material. And he thought it might be fabric, but he wasn't sure. And so they called in an expert, and he confirmed that yes, they had found textiles. This is huge. Woven fabric is an incredibly intricate and time-consuming item to make. And the fabric that they found at Wendover was so intricate, it showed that these people weren't just learning how to make woven fabric. This was created by a community of people that had been doing this for generations. And the type of weave and fabric that these people at Wendover were creating is considered the oldest of its kind in North America. So it's very significant. The fabric they were creating was made of palm fibers, probably from cabbage palm, which is very common in the area. And the fabric that they found at the site was used to wrap the bodies. So the idea is that these people, once they had passed, were placed in that fetal position. They were the objects that were to be buried with them, were put with them, and then the whole bundle was wrapped in fabric before they were then submerged in the pond. To keep the bodies submerged, they were often had stakes kind of placed on either side of the body, and archaeologists, found these stakes as well. And so these fabrics were, created ideally just for this ceremony of burial, which is very, very important and fascinating. Now, Wendover isn't the only underwater ancient burial site that has been found in Florida. There's been quite a few more, and we're actually always finding new ones. Pretty recently, in 2018, an ancient burial site was discovered off of Manasota Key. This one's especially interesting because it's in the Gulf of Mexico. Most of these sites are found inland in, what are still, ponds or springs. But we have to remember that Florida's geology has changed so much, even just in the last 20,000 years, that a site that is now underwater in the Gulf could have once been above water and been a pond. And so there's many archaeologists that are excavating this very unique wet site. Today, there are no active excavations happening at the Windover Pond, and nature's actually taken it over. Unless you knew it was there, you would drive right by it. Objects and remains that have been excavated live at Florida State University in Tallahassee, and these people at Windover have a lot more to teach us. Science and technology has advanced so much since the site was first discovered that these remains and the objects associated with them are still being studied. So who knows what else we have to learn from the people of Windover. If you're interested in learning more about this site, I've really just scratched the surface for you. I highly recommend the Brevard Museum of History and Natural Sciences. They have an entire exhibition dedicated to the Windover site. Also, all of the information that I've gathered about the site has come from this book, Life and Death at Windover by Dr. Rachel Wentz. Dr. Wentz was one of the archaeologists to work on the site, and she provides a really great account of kind of how the site was founded, all of the lab work that goes into it, without using a lot of technical jargon. Also, all of the photos in this video from of the site come from the Florida State Library collection. And if you want to check out the tour that I created that includes Windover and some other archaeological sites and how they relate to the museum, you can check out our Pathways app by searching Bishop Pathways in either the App Store or on Google Play. And the tour is called No Shoes, No Chert, No Problems.